Hi, my name is Joel Klein. I'm going to be doing a talk called Livecoding, a web app in the Wolfram Cloud. It's going to be what it sounds like. We're going to be writing a program from scratch and exploring how to use the Wolfram Cloud to build a complete web application. I have a little bit of an unusual format for this talk. The live coding means that instead of a talk with a bunch of slides, I'm going to be writing a program and talking out loud my thought process. In the past, I've given talks where I was talking about programming for the cloud, the programmer's environment for the cloud, and this is sort of in that same vein, but more hands-on approach. I've done this sort of thing in-house inside the company 5 times now, and it's gone 5 different ways. Every time we pick something new, we try it out, and sometimes it's pretty fun. Other times it kind of derails, and so it's just like real coding. The idea here is that we're picking familiar types of web apps. We're trying to pick off something that everybody's kind of familiar with, and there's many motivations for why we're doing this. One of my main motivations is just, can I do kind of a minimal viable product with our technology? Do I run into any problems? Do I see, once I put myself in the driver's seat of the user, this is how I thought it was supposed to work, but now that I'm there, I can see, okay, either there's a bug here or this could be a little bit better experience. So that's kind of my motivation as an internal person, but I also see it's pretty useful as just an example. So I'd like to kind of develop a suite of these examples, if possible, and make them available. In my Pathable talk, there's a link at the end to a live web page, and for the foreseeable future anyway, I'll be linking examples there. I linked some live examples that I didn't have last week. The links weren't there, the examples were. So if you go back to that, you'll see some of the things we've done. And I want to... Can I zoom this? Yeah. Yeah. That's going to be interesting once I start coding, but definitely for this I can. So some of the types of web apps we're talking about. The blog, the online store, Evite, surveys, and it's kind of interesting once you get into this mindset of kind of studying these as a familiar thing. What's at the core of it is what I'm wondering. What's the data flow to this? It's interesting to see how some of these are actually very similar to others. The ones I've bolded here are ones that I've attempted in my internal talks, and some of those. The ones that were successful have demo links. The ones that weren't so successful don't have demo links. Last night, or yesterday afternoon and into the night, I tried doing the classified ads. I tried to redo Craigslist, and it wasn't too bad. Craigslist has this interesting aspect to it that you don't have to register as a user to use it. It kind of interacts with your email to so that you can go edit things. You get this email where you have a link to delete things or go back to edit your post. So that's kind of interesting. The demo there is not completely functional. I got it to the point where you can, submit a new listing and it shows up in a listing, but it doesn't actually take you to the listing yet. So just want to set your expectations. A couple things. Apologies in advance if I spend most of my time looking down at the screen instead of up at you. And the other thing is we may not get to a fully functional web app of any description by the end, but you're hopefully going to see kind of the thought process on how we're getting there. I view this more as a sport, like one of my favorite sports is baseball, and it's just, you don't know if you're going to be able to hit that blazing ball coming by you or not. Sometimes you're successful, sometimes you're not. So this is more like a sport than like a play where you have a canned talk. So our method, the rough outline of what I'm going to try to do, I'm going to pick a topic, and for a long time when I was anticipating this talk, I was going to try to do this as pure as possible, and I started realizing that's not fair to the audience. I was going to come up here and say, okay, I don't know what I'm going to do. Let's pick something and go completely blind. I'm not going to do that. I've thought a little bit about what I want to do, but I'm still following the same process. So the first thing is we're going to talk about what are the absolutely bare essential features that we're trying to do. If you don't focus on that, you're not going to get through much in an hour or half an hour or whatever. I'm going to just go through, and then we're going to go into the model view controller view of building any kind of interface. And sometimes I'm going to, I think, play a little fast and loose with the terms here. The model, for my purposes, can be both just some data that's in memory. In Mathematica is a very nice prototyping environment, so we can, say, well, this is what the data is. I haven't built the whole thing to create the data yet, but I can just, make some example data off the fly. But the model can also be, how am I representing that data? How am I persisting it? And the more I've worked on this, the more I realize, that really is a big part of the problem we're solving. The view, just the presentation of how it looks, and even more important, how we transition between the different pages that we have. And then the controller, just the web endpoints, the cloud objects that are making the whole thing work. One big thing about the view that I want to, and a couple caveats before we really get into this. I started out, my first example I picked was a blog. And a blog is interesting because the core of that content, the blog post, formatting is really important. And I naturally picked a cloud notebook as the way that we would present that and the way we would edit that because it was already built. For a lot of these other things like the Craigslist, formatting is still kind of important, but it's not as critical. But I still had this choice about how am I going to make this online? And for the time being, I'm relying completely on cloud notebooks, actually. I had thought that I was going to do this with just raw HTML and raw or generated HTML. And one of the things you can do is you can go surfing the web. You can find some template if you're not a designer. You can kind of customize that. You can turn it into the XML template in the language. Put in template slots. You can iterate over sequences. It works. I've done it. But right now, that's not as productive as just using the user interface elements, the typesetting, and just the cloud notebook display features. There's a lot of trade-offs with that because cloud notebooks were not built to be the web, so there's some things that don't quite work. I may also do things a little bit differently as far as data storage. I'm completely just using sort of expressions stored in cloud objects. And one of the problems that bugs me as I do this all the time is synchronization. If you have multiple people hitting your Craigslist site, your Craigslist knockoff, the software that I'm building is susceptible to, well, if two people kind of put their request in at the same time, you can get this interleaving that's going to result in somebody's data getting lost. In the future, I won't promise when, but in the future we will have support for synchronization on cloud objects. A way to do that exists right now is cloud expressions. So you might ask, why am I not using cloud expressions? I'm not going to try to justify that whole thing right now. It is an excellent way to model this. So I'm not downplaying, I'm just not doing it right now, sort of basically for simplicity of presentation. It's just much easier to say, I'm putting. So let's get started. To do, pick a web app, okay, and then implement it, okay. So if we go back to our list of types, what I'm thinking about is a forum, just discussion threads. So actually, I do want to mention some common tools because I am following kind of a similar thing all the time. I'm going to be using, I'm going to start by defining a root directory for the application, and everything is built off of that. So deploying the application is, a create directory. Inside that directory is going to be a home page. And then other pages we build will come off of that. I've got a couple of utility functions that I'm finding really important to already have predefined. One of them is just, and I'm not a front-end anything, so there's probably better ways to do this. But basically, I've defined a function output cell that where I give it some kind of a display expression like a row or a column or something, and that gives me an output cell where that's going to be typeset. And I'm going to use this for hyperlinks, for lists, and all kinds of things. And the other thing that I found useful is the app header cell, where in a Cloud Notebook I can make a docked cell that's always going to appear at the top. Can kind of give you a consistent look and feel for all of your pages, the logo, maybe a menu, or at least a backlink to the home page, things like that. Another utility function for adding to a cloud object that is a list of things that may or may not exist when I start.
Not in the notebook that we have.
The safe append and the output cell are not there. I can add these to the online resource, but yeah, I literally threw these in a couple hours ago, just sort of right after I handed in my slide deck. Okay, so that's roughly where we're going. So let's get out of the slideshow. Something keeps going full screen, and I don't know why. Okay, so the app that I'd like to explore is like I said, the forum. I'm going to pick a cloud object. Okay, so this is the critical point. How well can you read that? Do I need to go 200? Okay, so I'm in the public cloud, as we call it. I'm logged in. And I'm just going to have a directory WTC. So what is our workflow? So we're going to have a home page. On the home page, we want to have a list of posts. We want to have a way to create new posts. So we're going to have a create new discussion thread, sort of a link, and then we'll have a header that says we have a list of threads, and then we'll have, thread one, kind of a title, and so on. And those will link to thread pages. The one question we have to ask ourselves is identity of the users. I think for a forum, you kind of want to know who is posting things. So we're going to make a decision that you have to be logged in. And we'll have a forum title. Home is going to be the title, and then this is just my text kind of notes of what the page layout is like. Forum title, and then we're going to have a switch that asks, is the user who requested this logged in? Do we know who this user is? If they are not logged in, we're going to have a link that says, log in to post or comment. And if they are already logged in, we'll say, welcome, user. So that'll be in our header. So we have to do this page. We have to handle this. We have to create a new discussion thread, and we need to be able to list these things. Yeah, this is very different when you can't look at as much as on a larger screen. Let's see. I defined a root. I'm going to. So I have I'm going to have a function deploy app. And all of my functions I've decided makes sense to take as an argument the root of the whole app. And this gives us flexibility to sort of take this as a cookie cutter and create, in our case, create a new forum. One simplifying assumption we're making here is that you might have a forum site where it has different categories. I'm not going to do categories. Basically, this forum is the category, if that makes sense. So deploy app is going to be some things. It's going to be, we're going to create the directory for the application. And I'm quieting that because create directory complains if it already exists, which is not something that I'm a huge fan of, but that's how it works. And again, it's our cloud objects. This is going to create the cloud object. We're going to redeploy the home page. And there is a, and I'm going to return that at the end of deploy app. So file name join is overloaded to work with cloud objects, and file name join is the way that I construct cloud objects that are, basically take this cloud object and add stuff to the end of it. And this is such a common idiom that this is in my usual bag of tricks now, the app link. It's just saving a few characters, but it sort of makes it readable. So deploy home, and I want to get this up as soon as possible so we can kind of see a coming soon page. So deploy home is, like all the functions taking the root cloud object, it is going to cloud deploy. And for right now, I'm literally going to have it say coming soon. Say that again? I'm going to have this be a delayed, and it's going to be the type cloud CDF. We're deploying to the app home cloud object, and it's going to be public. Okay. So we'll see. Sorry? Yes, I do. So where's our mistake? You're right. Thank you. I'm going to try okay. So now we're going to see what we get here. Yes. So one of the things that's coming in 11.3 is cloud object name format, where the default for named cloud objects is that in this user spec slot here, it's going to use your user URL base, which is, by default, it's kind of the left-hand side of your Wolfram ID email address. For me, that's JF Klein. The default right now is to use the full user UUID, which is the nice thing about that is it's a stable ID. It can never change. You can't change it, but it's not very readable. And in my case, I want to publish this, so I want a nicer name. So we're often, often going in the sense that we've got some vaporware now. I'm going to save this. just because that's my habit. And I'm going to make a tiny little window to redeploy. As we work on that. So the home page, we really wanted this to be a notebook. I'm going to keep it like that, and I'm going to add so a text cell that says that, and we're going to have a, here is where I'm going to make use of this app header cell function that I defined before. So it takes the root cloud object, a title, and some content. So root Technology Conference forum. It's too long. And some content cells. So just going to put something there. I am needing to close the notebook expression. So there we go. We now have the docked cell, and we have a space to put some other stuff. And what did we say? We said we need to log in to post or comment and start a new discussion and the posts lists. So this part, I'm going to put my output cell, a hyperlink, start a new discussion thread, and I have an app link to a cloud object called create, or it will be. And we're going to have what am I doing? We're going to have a cell that's going to say posts, and it's a subsection. And we're going to have, I'm going to join in, this is a placeholder function to convert a post, a piece of post information to a cell. I'm going to map it over the empty list for now because we don't have any posts. So that's a to-do. And I'm going to redeploy. So the start a new discussion thread, we'll have to create that. We also want people to log in. And in order to start a new discussion thread, we want people logged in anyway. So I'm going to modify this part. This is in that docked cell. So we're going to check to see if the requester is none. That means they're unauthenticated. They need to log in. So we're going to put a link there. Log in to post or comment, and we need app link takes root. And if they are logged in, we're going to have a row that welcomes them. and I would like to welcome using like a full name. One of the things that I've thought about this whole project is that I'm really trying to make a minimal viable product. I want to basically out of an hour or two's worth of work, have something that is the bare bones. And what happens once you have that bare bones program that takes maybe, I don't know, that much. It doesn't take that much code. What tends to happen as you look at it, you start to see like, well, I'd really like to have users register. I don't want them just logging in. I want them to make a profile. And what's nice is that, sort of for educational reasons or just for learning the system, if you look at sort of this example minimal, implementation, you can it kind of just begs you, like, don't you want to add this feature to create a profile? And so I think it's motivating for people to say, like, well, it doesn't already have this feature, I can add it. And I can add it in some way that I envision or that I want to customize. So I'm not putting that in there. I'd like to have like a full name here. I'm going to put their email address. Let's see, what did I not close off? So I need to close off the if. And I'm going to redeploy that. And I kind of needed a spacer. This was too close. So this part right here, I'm just going to literally add, a few spaces. So here we can see I'm logged in. It's welcoming me. If you have a laptop, if somebody wants to try visiting this address, objects.jf Klein, capital WTC/home, and you're not logged into the cloud, just let me know if it shows you as expected that it's not logged in. Now we need to build this logged in page, or I called it login page. My thought there is I want to hyperlink the user to a page, and I want that page to require that they log in. The way to do that is actually with permissions. The login page is going to have, let's see, deploy login page root cloud object. This is going to be a cloud deploy of, let's just say a delayed again. And I'm going to do a column. Okay, minimal viable product. I could do a link here, but I'm actually going to just say, press the back button. So I don't really need that column, but that's fine. So we need an app link. What did we call it? Login, capital L, capital I. And the permissions that we're going to use, this is the key part, are authenticated goes to read. Actually, in this case, execute, since it's a delayed. This could be static. It doesn't have to be delayed. Delayed is when you want to, delayed means do a calculation, a computation. So that's deploy login page. I'm going to check the app link to see that we linked it. So capital L, capital I, log in. And after we create the directory, we're going to deploy the login page as well. I'm going to make that part of deploying the app. I'm not going to check that right now. We're going to move on.
Yeah, it works.
Cool, it works. The authenticated just means that, if you're an authenticated user, you need permission. And the logic here is that when you visit a page, if you don't already have permissions according to whatever rules the permission system gives you, it makes you log in no matter what. Once you log in, then you have the permissions and it lets you see that. Okay, we need to do a couple of things. We need to create the model for the posts, and we need to create a way to add to them. The example I did yesterday with the classified ads, the approach was, one of the concerns that you always have when you're designing one of these things is scalability. And one of the things that I ended up deciding to do with like a classified ad that sort of seems to make sense here is divide things by days. So if today somebody posts something, we're going to write it to a collection for today's posts, things that were created on this date. And then when we list things, we can, it gives us some flexibility for sort of like, I'm going to show a limited number of days. So anyway, that's the thought. But we need that list. So there's going to be a data directory for cloud objects that are just sort of the data behind this. And that is an app link to, I'll make it lowercase data. And when we deploy the app, we want that data directory to exist. So this is one of the model parts. So model for posts. So we want to have in the data directory we want to have a list of dates and a dates.m. This is just going to be, for example, a list of strings, sort of like year, month, day format. So content like that. And then the discussion, we want to think about how we want to represent the discussion thread itself. So the discussion thread, the thread itself, we have some metadata like the user that created it, the title, and sort of their initial post. So thread information. So we have the date created, the user who created, a title, the initial post content. That sort of sounds like it's not any different from the rest of the post content, so we might store that in a separate place. We might have these things in an association, and then the initial post content can just be stored along with follow-ups. What about a thread? A thread post is sort of the same thing. Say it again? You're talking about the safe put? These are just stars. These are just asterisks. Escape BU, escape is the bullet symbol. Yeah. So a thread post looks very similar. It's going to have date created, user who created it, and the content in that case. If we make, so say a list of, say a list of posts, which includes the initial one. So what I'm imagining is a directory data threads, and then for a particular for a particular date, we need a list of threads. So they'll actually be I can imagine that data/date.m would give you lists the threads for that date. Under the threads, then we have these don't have to be partitioned by date, but they can be. Yeah, I found that this is where this model design is where I often kind of go back and forth between some different representations, and the more I look at it, the more I think that there's a regular way of approaching this, and what I'm really thinking about is, what is that kind of uniform way to approach it. I think in the interest of time, we're going to go with just a flat representation of the threads. We're not going to go by dates. So that would be that would be more like a threads.m, where we would have some IDs. So an ID for number 1, an ID for number 2. And then so let's try to do that. Let's say that there's this thread data object, which is an app link of the app data with threads.m, and then thread data is going to fetch that. So if we have so let's say app home of our root, we want to check that. And app data of root is that. Then the thread data object is this threads.m. And it doesn't have anything in it right now. There's nothing in there. So I think what we're going to do is sort of a safe version of this. A safe but not very synchronized version. So there's no thread data right now. And if we want to create a new thread, that means two things. It means adding to this list, and it means creating the thread information. So the data threads.m, we're going to have these IDs. Instead of a date, it's just going to be a thread ID. And then the thread itself is going to have posts. So there's going to be a thread.m for meta information about the thread. Which includes, I think the thread posts make sense to separate out. So the thread.m would include things like the date created, the user who created it, and the title. The thread posts would be the list of post IDs. And then a post directory would have post ID.m files that contain the rest of it. So what did we have? We had I'm going to move this code for the thread model down by our notes for the thread. So we want to write a function that's going to create a new thread. What does that involve? It's going to involve, we're going to have a data association. And the data will have created field, a creating user, and a title. It will also have an ID that will be some random ID. Or maybe we will assign that. So the create thread, once we get this function, we can create a form that's going to call this function, which is going to add it to our model. We're going to create a random integer, some ID that's in a somewhat compact form. We're going to have a cloud object for it. One of the last things we're going to do in this is append. So this safe append function that I added, what we want to add to the threads.m, or the thread posts.m, I guess. We want to add the ID. So we need a thread posts object. So safe append will append to that thread posts object. It will append the data, and we're going to append to this data an ID field. So this data that we're getting in, we're going to add another field with this ID. We're actually going to say that this is a rule. So I'm changing the model there. The model's going to have, no, we said that threads.m is going to be the list of IDs. That's right. So we're actually appending to thread data object, just the ID. Okay. So that populates threads.m with this. We need this threads directory created. So we're going to add that to the deploy home. I call it just threads dir. So this directory has now been created. We added some code to append to that list. We need to create the ID directory. So thread data directory, a root and a thread ID string is an app link of thread data and the thread ID. We'll double check that. So pass root here and just a made up ID. We just want to check what the cloud object is going to look like. That is not right. What's that? So thing is empty. Thread data, yeah, threads dir, thank you. I think since we're getting close to the end of the time, I'm going to try to wrap up a thought here and take a couple of questions. So WC data, threads, and then the ID. So that looks right. Threads dir. So part of this would be creating the directory for the thread data, dir, and the ID. So that gives us this level, and then we would be creating the thread.m from this data. So the to-dos here are create in the ID data dir the threads.m with data, and then populate the thread posts.m with a list of one thing, the initial post. Once we get that, then we would have created enough of the model that we could at least call from the command line a function, or command line, the inside the language, we could call a function to populate that data, and then we could work on displaying the data under the post lists. We would be iterating from that. Okay, that's where I'm going to go. Don't know where I'd rank this on the success list. It did actually turn out to be more involved than I thought. But that's what I have. So questions?
You're going to finish it up and then at some point later?
With all of these, I'm trying to go back to them as I have time and round them out, yeah.
So then would it be possible to get access to it?
Yeah. So the idea, what I envision, I think what's ideal is that I publish, all those functions, so you kind of have a package. And it's what I like is, I've used WordPress from time to time, and that's a neat language, or a neat environment. It's a certain kind of, it does a certain thing. It's obviously very feature rich. So I'm sort of imagining it a bit like WordPress. One of the differences being that this is not only the software that runs on the back end, but it's also a deployment. So from our desktop, we can be pushing this up to Wolfram Cloud in various spots. So it sort of takes care of the hosting part as well as the engine. Yeah, Bob?
Do you think notebooks as a result are at this point a reasonable full solution?
What is?
A notebook interface as a result for
It is good for some things. It's definitely pros and cons right now. I think it's one thing that you'll notice if you try some of my demos is that links always open in a new tab, which is not ideal. That's probably the number one glaring, like, what's going on thing. But there's a lot of good things from it. We had another question.
That's exactly a question, but when the login page works, but when I log in, it says that I don't have the permission to go on the page.
On this page?
Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. I can look into that. Yeah.
Is there a way to embed this kind of cloud CDF thing into a normal HTML page other than iframe?
Other than iframe right now, no. Yeah. So I think that's my time. I'll be happy to take questions afterwards, but.